The crystal stemware trembled against the white tablecloth as Maya Rodriguez set down the water glasses, her hands steady despite the storm brewing in her chest. Table 12, the corner booth with the view of downtown's glittering skyline, had been occupied for exactly 17 minutes by 3 men in suits that cost more than her monthly rent. The one in the center hadn't looked up from his phone once. "Excuse me." His voice cut through the ambient jazz like a blade through silk. "This water tastes like it came from a garden hose." Maya paused, her fingers still wrapped around the empty pitcher. The restaurant's filtration system had been installed just last month, pristine, expensive, the kind that turned tap water into something that could be bottled and sold for $5. She'd watched the installation herself during her morning prep shift. "I can get you bottled water, sir. We have Pellegrino," or "I don't want your excuses." He finally lifted his eyes to meet hers. "I want competence, something that seems to be in short supply around here." The man to his left, younger, nervous, constantly adjusting his tie, cleared his throat. "Richard, maybe we should just—" "No, Marcus." Richard's attention never wavered from Maya. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. Standards, excellence, the difference between success and mediocrity." He gestured around the restaurant, his watch catching the light. "Look at this place, trying so hard to be something it's not. The servers probably don't even know the difference between a Bordeaux and a Burgundy." Maya's jaw tightened. She knew the wine list by heart, but she said nothing, just reached for the offending water glass. "Actually," the third man spoke, his voice carrying a slight accent Maya couldn't place, "the ambiance here is quite lovely, and the water tastes perfectly fine to me." Richard turned to his companion. "Alessandro, your standards have always been accommodating." Alessandro, tall, elegant, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, smiled diplomatically. "Perhaps, or perhaps I simply appreciate authenticity over pretense." The words hung in the air like smoke. Maya felt the familiar weight of her father's ring on her right hand, the simple gold band he'd worn while building his first restaurant from nothing. She twisted it once, a habit that centered her when the world felt off-kilter. "Sir," Maya said, her voice controlled, professional, giving nothing away, "I'll bring you a selection of bottled waters. Our sommelier also suggests pairing today's special, the pan-seared duck with cherry gastrique, with a 2019 Willamette Valley Pinot Noir. Would you like to hear more about our wine program?" Richard's laugh was sharp, dismissive. "Wine program? Sweetheart, I own restaurants in Manhattan that have sommeliers with decades of experience. I don't need recommendations from someone who probably thinks a wine program means knowing red from white." The silence that followed was deafening. Other diners had begun to notice, conversations dropping to whispers, servers slowing their movements to catch fragments of the exchange. Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks, but not from embarrassment, from rage, carefully controlled, precisely channeled. "Of course, sir. I'll be right back with your waters." She turned away, her steps measured, professional, giving nothing away. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. She'd dealt with difficult customers before, but something about this man, Richard, felt different, dangerous, like he took pleasure in the diminishment of others. In the server station, Maya's hands shook as she arranged bottles of imported water on a silver tray. Her coworker, Jenny, appeared beside her, eyes wide with concern. "Girl, what just happened out there? I could feel the tension from across the room." Table 12, the guy in the middle, thinks his money makes him royalty. Jenny glanced towards the dining room. "The silver-haired one? Damn, he's fine, but if looks could kill." She studied Maya's face. "You okay? You look like you're about to murder someone." "I'm fine." Maya's voice was tight. "Just another day in paradise." But she wasn't fine. Something about Richard's casual cruelty, his assumption that her work made her less than human, had struck a nerve deeper than usual. Maybe it was the way he'd said sweetheart like it was an insult. Maybe it was the dismissive wave of his hand, as if she was a fly to be shooed away. Or maybe it was the look in his eyes, not just arrogance, but genuine contempt. Maya understood the restaurant business inside and out. But more than that, she understood something Richard clearly didn't, that every person who walked through those doors deserved respect. The businessman closing million-dollar deals, the couple celebrating their anniversary on a budget, the elderly woman who came in every Tuesday for the early bird special and left memories of her late husband in every tip. They all mattered. They all had stories. She picked up the tray, feeling the familiar weight, and walked back into the dining room. The conversations had resumed their normal volume, but she could feel eyes tracking her movement. Table 12 had gone quiet, Richard typing furiously on his phone, while Marcus and Alessandro sat in uncomfortable silence. "Gentlemen," Maya set down the bottles with practiced precision. Pellegrino, Evian, Fiji, each positioned exactly where it should be. "Take your time deciding. I'll be back to take your dinner orders." "Actually," Alessandro said, his voice warm, "I think I'm ready. The duck special sounds wonderful." Richard looked up from his phone, irritation flickering across his features. "Alessandro, we haven't even looked at the wine list yet." "The Pinot Noir the young lady suggested sounds perfect." Maya felt a small spark of gratitude. Alessandro was clearly trying to smooth over the earlier tension, but his kindness only seemed to aggravate Richard further. "Fine. Marcus, what about you?" The younger man fumbled with his menu. I'll have the salmon, and whatever wine you think is best, Richard." Richard's smile was cold. "Of course you will." He turned to Maya, his expression shifting to something that might have been amusing if it weren't so cutting. "I'll have the ribeye, medium rare. And since your sommelier apparently thinks an Oregon Pinot pairs with everything, bring me something that actually complements red meat. Something from Napa. Something expensive. Think you can handle that?" Maya's smile never wavered. "Absolutely, sir. We have a 2018 Camus Cabernet that would be perfect. It's $95 a bottle." "Perfect." His tone suggested he'd expected her to recommend the cheapest option. "See, not so hard when you actually try." Alessandro cleared his throat. "Richard, perhaps—" "What?" Richard's attention snapped to his companion. "Perhaps I should lower my standards to make everyone comfortable. Perhaps I should pretend mediocrity is acceptable." He gestured toward Maya, who was still standing beside their table. "This is what's wrong with this country, Alessandro. Everyone gets a participation trophy. Everyone thinks their best effort is good enough, regardless of the actual quality." Maya felt something crystallize inside her chest. Not anger, she'd moved past that. This was clarity, sharp and cold as winter air. She looked at Richard, really looked at him, taking in the perfectly tailored suit, the Rolex, the way he held himself like the world owed him deference. "Sir, I'll get your wine right away." "Is there anything else I can bring you while you're waiting for your meals?" Richard seemed almost disappointed by her composure. He'd been poking and prodding, looking for a reaction, and her professionalism was clearly frustrating him. "Just the wine, and make sure it's properly decanted. I assume you know what that means." "Of course, sir." Maya walked away, feeling the weight of his gaze on her back. In the wine storage area, she found the Camus exactly where it should be, resting in the climate-controlled rack. Every detail of the restaurant reflected her father's vision and hard work. Maya uncorked the wine, letting it breathe while she prepared the decanter. Her movements were automatic, muscle memory developed over years of practice. But her mind was elsewhere, processing the encounter, filing away details about Richard's behavior, his tells, the way he interacted with his companions. "Maya," the voice made her turn. It was Alessandro, standing in the doorway of the wine storage area, looking apologetic and slightly embarrassed. "Sir, is everything all right?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I wanted to apologize for my colleague's behavior. Richard can be intense, especially when he's stressed about business. Maya studied his face. There was genuine regret there, and something else, a discomfort that went deeper than social embarrassment. "It's fine, sir. Really, I've dealt with worse." "That doesn't make it acceptable." Alessandro paused, seeming to weigh his words. "You handled yourself with remarkable grace. Your parents raised you well."
Alessandro. Please, call me Alessandro. He glanced back toward the dining room. I should return before Richard starts wondering where I've gone. But again, I apologize. Some people forget that how we treat others reflects who we are, not who they are. He left, and Maya stood alone among the wine bottles, feeling strangely unsettled. There had been something in Alessandro's tone, a weight behind his words that suggested he knew more about Richard's character than simple stress could explain. She finished preparing the wine service, arranging everything on a silver tray with the ceremony the vintage deserved. As she walked back through the dining room, she caught fragments of conversation from other tables, business deals being negotiated, families catching up over shared plates, a couple planning their weekend getaway, normal life, normal interactions between human beings who saw each other as equals. Table 12 was a stark contrast. Richard dominated the conversation, his voice cutting through whatever Marcus or Alessandro tried to contribute. He was telling a story about a restaurant in Beverly Hills, about servers who knew their place, and management that understood quality. "And that's the difference," he was saying as Maya approached with the wine. "When people understand hierarchy, when they know their role, everything runs smoothly. No attitude, no pretensions, just professional service." Maya began the wine service, pouring a small amount for Richard to taste. He swirled it, sniffed, sipped, all with the exaggerated ceremony of someone performing for an audience. "Acceptable," he pronounced, as if granting a royal pardon. Maya poured for each man, her movements fluid, professional, invisible. She was about to leave when Richard's voice stopped her. "You know what the real problem is with places like this?" He wasn't looking at her, but the words were clearly intended for her ears. "They try to be something they're not. Upscale dining with community college staff. It's like putting a Hermes label on a Target handbag. The pretense is obvious to anyone with real standards." Alessandro set down his wine glass with slightly more force than necessary. "Richard, I think that's enough." "Enough truth? Alessandro, this is exactly why your restaurants in Milan struggle with consistency. You're too soft. You don't demand excellence." Maya felt the moment crystallize around her like amber. She could walk away, finish her shift, go home to her apartment and her textbooks and her plans for a future that didn't include listening to entitled men tear down everything she'd worked for. She could let it go, the way she'd let 100 similar moments go. Instead, she spoke. "Sir, if I may, your wine is from the Rutherford AVA, specifically from vineyard blocks that sit at the base of the Mayacamas Mountains. The 2018 vintage was particularly notable because of an early October heat spike that concentrated the tannins, giving it that bold structure you're tasting. The decanting process has allowed the wine to open up, which is why you're getting those notes of blackcurrant and cedar on the finish." The table went completely silent. Richard stared at her, his expression unreadable. Maya continued, her voice steady, conversational. "The restaurant you mentioned in Beverly Hills, Lumiere. I actually staged there last summer. Their wine program is impressive, but they focus primarily on French vintages. Their sommelier, David Chen, is brilliant, but he'd be the first to tell you that Oregon Pinots are having a moment. The terroir in the Willamette Valley produces wines with an elegance that rivals Burgundy, especially from producers like Domaine Drouin and Archery Summit." Richard's face had gone pale, then flushed red. Marcus looked like he wanted to disappear into his seat. Alessandro was watching Maya with something that might have been admiration. How did you... He started, then stopped himself. Know about Lumiere? I worked there for 6 weeks, learning from some of the best professionals in the industry. Before that, I spent 2 years at Les Bernardines in New York. I'm currently completing my Level 2 sommelier certification through the Court of Master Sommeliers. Maya's smile was pleasant, professional, and deadly. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to share my knowledge. Is there anything else I can tell you about your wine selection? The silence stretched until Alessandro began to laugh. Not mockingly, but with genuine delight. Brava, he said, raising his glass in a small toast. Absolutely brava. Richard's jaw was tight, his hands clenched on the white tablecloth. When he spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet. Congratulations! You know more than I expected. That doesn't change the fact that you're still serving tables instead of running your own restaurant. There's usually a reason for that.
Maya felt the words hit like a physical blow, but she kept her expression neutral. Enjoy your evening, gentlemen. I'll check on you shortly. She walked away on steady legs, but inside, something was crumbling. Because Richard was right, in the cruelest possible way. She did know the business, had the knowledge, the passion, the vision, but knowledge didn't pay for commercial real estate. Passion didn't cover equipment costs or insurance, with 1,000 other expenses that turned dreams into reality. In the back corridor leading to the kitchen, Maya leaned against the cool brick wall and closed her eyes. Her father's ring felt heavier on her finger, weighted with all the dreams she'd inherited, along with his work ethic and his stubborn pride. Maya! Jenny appeared beside her, concern written across her face. What happened? You look like you've seen a ghost. Table 12 happened. Maya straightened, smoothing down her apron. It's fine. Just another reminder that the customer is always right, even when they're completely wrong about everything that matters. But as she said it, Maya realized something had shifted. The encounter with Richard hadn't just been about bad service or difficult customers. There'd been something personal in his cruelty, something that went beyond mere arrogance. He looked at her not just as a server, but as a representation of everything he found distasteful about the world. Ambition without pedigree, knowledge without privilege, excellence that dared to exist outside the boundaries he'd drawn. And Maya realized, with crystal clarity, that she was going to prove him wrong. Not tonight, not next week, but someday. She was going to build something that would make Richard's casual dismissal seem not just wrong, but laughably short-sighted. The thought should have been satisfying, but instead it felt like a weight settling onto her shoulders, because proving Richard wrong would require everything she had, and some things she didn't have yet. It would require sacrifices and risks, and a kind of courage she wasn't sure she possessed. But as she walked back toward the dining room, checking on her other tables, ensuring every detail was perfect, Maya felt something new stirring in her chest. Not just anger or determination, but a quiet, dangerous resolve. Richard had made one crucial mistake. He had assumed that because she was serving tables, she was powerless. He'd confused her current circumstances with her ultimate destination. It was a mistake that would cost him more than he could possibly imagine. If you're finding this story as gripping as I am, please take just 30 seconds to hit that like button and share it with someone who appreciates tales of justice and perseverance. Your support helps me bring you more stories like this one, and it truly means the world to me. Maya's alarm buzzed at 4:47 a.m., 3 minutes before she'd set it to ring. She'd been awake for 20 minutes already, staring at the ceiling of her studio apartment, replaying the previous night's encounter with Richard over and over like a song stuck on repeat. The man's words echoed in the pre-dawn darkness. There's usually a reason for that. She rolled out of bed, her feet hitting the cold hardwood floor with a soft thud that seemed too loud in the silence. Through her one window, Los Angeles was still draped in that peculiar urban twilight, not quite night, not quite morning. Streetlights creating pools of amber in the indigo shadows. The apartment was sparse by necessity, not design. A Murphy bed that she had inherited from the previous tenant, A small desk where her laptop lived was surrounded by textbooks on hospitality management, wine guides with dog-eared pages, and notebooks filled with business plans sketched out in her careful handwriting. The kitchen was barely large enough for one person, but Maya had learned to make magic in small spaces, a skill inherited from watching her father perform miracles with a single burner at a hot plate during their food truck days. She made coffee in a French press, a luxury she justified because good coffee was one of the few indulgences her budget allowed. While it steeped, she reviewed her schedule, written in neat columns on a whiteboard that served as her command center. Tuesday, morning shift at Corazón, 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. Evening classes at UCLA Extension, 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. Advanced restaurant operations. Home by 10:30 p.m. if the metro was running on time. The routine was punishing, but it was hers. Every early morning, every double shift, every night spent studying when her body begged for sleep, it was all building towards something. The restaurant she'd open someday, the empire she built from nothing, the way her father had done it, but with better planning, more capital, and a clearer vision of what success actually looked like. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Mija? Did you eat dinner last night? You looked thin when you came by Sunday." She smiled despite herself. Carmen Rodriguez had been worrying about Maya's weight since the day she was born, convinced that her slender frame was evidence of insufficient mothering. She typed back, "I ate, Mommy. Made that pasta salad you taught me."
The response was immediate. "Good. Your father says you've been working too much. Come for dinner Thursday. I'm making a mole." Maya's chest tightened. Thursday was her only full day off, the one day she'd planned to spend on her business plan, researching locations, crunching numbers on equipment costs. But her mother's mole was legendary, and she hadn't seen her parents in person for 2 weeks. "I'll be there," she typed, then added, "Tell Papi I love him." She finished her coffee while scanning industry news on her tablet. Restaurant closures were up 15% from last year. Commercial real estate prices in desirable neighborhoods were climbing faster than wages. A new gastropub in Silver Lake had closed after 8 months, citing labor costs and competition. The news should have been discouraging, but Maya found it oddly motivating. Every failure was a lesson, every mistake was research for her own eventual success. At 6:15 a.m., Maya stepped out into the Los Angeles morning, her server's uniform crisp and professional, her hair pulled back in a neat bun that would survive a 12-hour shift. The walk to Corazón took 23 minutes through neighborhoods that shifted character with every block, from her modest corner of Echo Park through the increasingly gentrified strips of Sunset Boulevard, past coffee shops with names like Artisanal and Handcraft that charged $7 for drinks her father had been making for decades. Corazón sat on its familiar corner, already humming with morning prep. The restaurant was already humming with morning prep when Maya arrived. The kitchen filled with the sounds she'd grown up with. Knives against cutting boards, pans heating on gas flames, the industrial dishwasher running its first cycle of the day. Miguel, the head chef, waved from behind the pass, already 6 hours into his prep work. "Morning, Jefa," he called out, using the affectionate term for boss lady that the kitchen staff had adopted for Maya. It was partly teasing, she was technically just another server, but partly recognition of the way she'd grown up in restaurants, the way she understood every aspect of operations, from inventory to plating. "Morning, Miguel. How are we looking for tonight?" "Good. Your father's special is going to be the braised short ribs with mole negro. Told him we should charge more. That sauce takes 3 days to make right. But you know how he is." "I do know." Carlos remained focused on feeding people well rather than maximizing profits. It was admirable and frustrating in equal measure. She made her way to the server station, checking supplies, reviewing the day's specials, preparing for the controlled chaos that would begin when they opened at 7 a.m. Corazón served breakfast to the construction workers and office commuters, lunch to the business crowd, and dinner to everyone from young couples on date nights to families celebrating birthdays. Each service required different energy, different expertise, different versions of herself. At exactly 7 a.m., Maya unlocked the front door and flipped the sign to open. Within minutes, the morning regulars began arriving.
Roberto, who ordered 2 eggs over easy and black coffee every weekday, Mrs. Chen, who came for the breakfast burrito and left with containers of salsa verde for her grandchildren, and David, a struggling screenwriter, who made a single cup of coffee last 3 hours while working on his laptop in the corner booth. Maya moved through her morning routine with practiced efficiency, taking orders, serving food, making conversation with customers who had become part of her extended family over the years. But underneath the familiar rhythms, Richard's words from the night before kept surfacing like oil on water. There's usually a reason for that. Around 10 a.m., during the lull between breakfast and lunch, Maya's father appeared from the kitchen, his apron stained with evidence of the morning's prep work. Carlos Rodriguez was a man who seemed smaller than his presence suggested. Compact, weathered by decades of restaurant work, but with eyes that missed nothing and hands that could transform simple ingredients into something transcendent. "Mija," he said, settling onto the stool behind the register. "How was last night? You seemed upset when you left." Maya continued wiping down tables, not trusting herself to look at her father directly. "Just a difficult customer, nothing I couldn't handle." "Ah." Carlos's tone suggested he knew there was more to the story. "The kind of difficult that stays with you after the shift ends?" Maya paused in her cleaning, feeling the weight of her father's attention. Carlos had an uncanny ability to read people, customers, employees, especially his daughter. It had made him successful in the restaurant business, but it also meant Maya couldn't hide much from him. He was rude, dismissive, the usual. Just got under my skin more than usual, I guess. Carlos was quiet for a long moment, studying his daughter's face. When he spoke again, his voice was careful, measured.
"You know, when I started the food truck, I had customers who looked at me like I was invisible, like I was just part of the equipment, there to serve them and then disappear. It used to make me so angry I could barely sleep." Maya set down her clothes and looked at her father. This was a story she'd never heard before. What changed? I realized they weren't seeing me. They were seeing what they expected to see. Just another immigrant with a food truck, not someone who'd spent years perfecting every recipe, who knew more about flavor profiles and ingredient sourcing than most of the chefs in their fancy restaurants. Carlos smiled, but there was an edge to it. So I decided to show them who I really was, not through words, but through work. Through excellence, they couldn't ignore it. Did it work? Sometimes. The ones who mattered, yes. The ones who didn't, Carlos shrugged. Their loss. Maya felt something loosen in her chest. Her father understood and had been through his own version of what she'd experienced with Richard. But there was something else in his tone, a question he wasn't quite asking. "Puppy," she said carefully, "what if someone told you that there was a reason you were running a food truck instead of a restaurant? Maybe you just weren't cut out for something bigger?" Carlos's expression hardened, and for a moment, Maya could see the younger man he'd been, hungrier, angrier, more willing to fight for every scrap of respect. "I'd tell them to come back in 5 years and see what I'd built." His voice was quiet, but steel strong. "And if they still thought I wasn't cut out for success, I'd invite them to explain it to my customers, my employees, and my daughter who grew up in a business I built from nothing." Maya felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. Her father's faith in her was absolute, unwavering, sometimes overwhelming in its intensity. "What if I wanted to build something even bigger?" The words slipped out before she could stop them. "What if I wanted to prove that I could create something extraordinary?" Carlos was quiet for so long that Maya wondered if she'd overstepped, revealed too much of the ambition that felt almost greedy in its scope. "Mija," he said finally, "I built this place for a lot of reasons. To support our family, to serve good food, to have something that was mine." He gestured around the restaurant, taking in every carefully chosen detail. "But mostly, I built it so that you would have choices, so that when you were ready to build something of your own, you'd have the knowledge, the experience, and the foundation to build it right. Maya stared at her father, feeling something fundamental shift in their understanding of their relationship, of her place in the family business. You always knew I'd want something more? I hoped you would. You have gifts, mija, not just knowledge, but vision. You see possibilities that I never could. This place, he gestured around Corazón again, this is my dream fulfilled. But you were born to dream bigger. The conversation was interrupted by the lunch rush beginning to trickle in, but Maya carried her father's words with her as she moved through the rest of her shift. The validation was intoxicating, but it also made her more aware of the gap between her current reality and her aspirations. That evening, after her UCLA extension class on advanced restaurant operations, Maya sat in her apartment with her laptop open, working on the business plan that had become her obsession. She'd been refining it for 2 years, adjusting projections, researching locations, dreaming in spreadsheets and floor plans. The concept was ambitious, a restaurant that would showcase the sophistication of Mexican and Latin American cuisine while honoring its roots. Not fusion, but elevation. Taking the techniques and flavor profiles she'd learned growing up in her father's kitchen and applying them with the precision and presentation of haute cuisine. She'd calculated that she needed $350,000 to do it right, enough for a good location, quality equipment, proper marketing, and operating capital for the first year. Her current savings account held $23,847. At her current rate of saving, accounting for tuition payments and living expenses, she'd have the money she needed in approximately never. Maya closed the laptop and leaned back in her chair, feeling the weight of impossibility settle on her shoulders. Richard's words echoed again. There's usually a reason for that. Maybe he was right. Maybe ambition without capital was just delusion. Maybe I should be grateful for what I have. A steady job, a path towards management at Corazón, a comfortable, if unremarkable future in the family business. But as she prepared for bed, her reflection in the bathroom mirror showed her father's eyes, his stubborn chin, the same expression of quiet determination that had carried Carlos from a food truck to a successful restaurant. She thought about his story, about customers who had seen only what they expected to see, about excellence that couldn't be ignored.
Maya Rodriguez was 26 years old, carrying student loans and big dreams in equal measure. She worked 60-hour weeks and studied every free moment, saved every possible dollar, and planned every detail of a future that might never come to pass. But she was also Carlos Rodriguez's daughter, raised on stories of impossible dreams made real through relentless work and unwavering faith. She was a woman who knew the difference between Burgundy and Bordeaux, who could plate a dish with museum-quality precision, who understood profit margins and labor costs, and the delicate alchemy that turned simple ingredients into experiences people would remember for years. Tomorrow, she would serve tables and take classes, an inch closer to a dream that sometimes felt impossibly distant. She would smile at customers who saw her uniform instead of her potential, who assumed her current job defined her ultimate worth. And someday, maybe sooner than anyone expected, she would prove that there was no reason she couldn't build something extraordinary, something that would make Richard's casual dismissal not just wrong, but laughably short-sighted. The thought sustained her as she drifted off to sleep, still wearing her father's ring, still carrying the weight of dreams too big for her studio apartment, but somehow exactly the right size for her heart. I know you're probably as invested in Maya's journey as I am right now.
If this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe for more incredible stories of people who refuse to let others define their worth. Trust me, Maya's story is just getting started, and you won't want to miss what happens next. The first incident happened 3 days later, on a Friday night, when Corazón was packed with the dinner crowd and every table was occupied. Maya was in her zone, moving through the dining room with the fluid efficiency that came from years of experience, when she noticed table 7, a young couple celebrating what appeared to be an engagement, judging from the woman's frequent glances at her left hand and the man's nervous energy. She approached with menus and her professional smile. "Good evening. Congratulations on your engagement. Can I start you with something to drink?" The woman beamed. "Thank you. How did you know?" "Lucky guess," Maya said, glancing meaningfully at the small velvet box still sitting on the table. "And you have that look, like you're floating about 2 inches off the ground." They laughed, ordered wine, and Maya moved on to her next table. What she didn't notice was the man at the bar, well-dressed, watching the entire interaction with cold interest. Richard Thornfield had returned to Corazón, this time alone, nursing an expensive scotch and studying the restaurant like a general surveying a battlefield. 20 minutes later, as Maya delivered the couple's appetizers, she felt a presence behind her. She turned to find Richard standing uncomfortably close, his expression unreadable. "Excuse me," he said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "I couldn't help but notice you guessing about their engagement. That seems presumptuous, don't you think?" Maya felt her stomach drop. The young couple looked confused, their celebration momentarily dampened by the uncomfortable tension that had suddenly materialized at their table. "Sir," Maya said carefully, "I was simply offering congratulations based on assumptions." Richard cut her off. "What if you were wrong? What if this was actually a business dinner or a breakup conversation? Your presumption could have been deeply embarrassing for your customers." The woman at the table looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Actually, we are engaged. Just got engaged an hour ago, so that's not the point," Richard continued, his attention fixed on Maya. "The point is that servers should provide service, not commentary on their customers' personal lives. It's unprofessional." Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks, but her voice remained steady. "I apologize if my congratulations seemed inappropriate. I was simply trying to provide friendly service." "Friendly service," Richard repeated, as if the phrase tasted bad. "Yes, that seems to be a theme here. Casual familiarity masquerading as professionalism." He walked away, returning to his seat at the bar, leaving Maya standing beside the bewildered couple. The man reached across the table and took his fiancée's hand. "Ignore him," he said quietly to Maya. "Some people just can't stand to see other people happy." Maya managed to smile. "Thank you, and congratulations again. That's a beautiful ring." But the damage was done. Other diners had witnessed the exchange, and Maya could feel their eyes on her for the rest of the evening. Every interaction became self-conscious. Every friendly comment felt potentially problematic under the weight of Richard's scrutiny.
The second incident occurred the following Tuesday during the lunch rush. Maya was serving a table of businesswomen when Richard appeared again, this time with a different companion, a woman in her 50s with sharp features that she kept checking as if expecting important messages. Maya had just finished explaining the day's specials when she noticed Richard gesturing toward her table from across the room. His companion followed his gaze, studying Maya with the clinical interest of someone evaluating livestock. "I'll take the salmon," one of the businesswomen said. "And could you tell the chef to go easy on the salt? I'm watching my sodium." "Of course," Maya replied, making a note. "Chef Miguel is excellent about accommodating dietary restrictions." As she collected the menus, she heard Richard's voice, pitched just loud enough to carry across the dining room. "Exactly what I mean about unprofessional behavior. Making promises about kitchen modifications without checking with the chef first." Maya's pen froze mid-sentence. She looked up to see Richard watching her with that familiar cold amusement, as if he'd laid a trap and was waiting to see if she'd step into it. The businesswoman who'd ordered the salmon looked confused. "Is there a problem with the modification request?" Not at all, Maya said firmly. I'll speak with the chef personally to ensure your meal is prepared exactly to your preferences. But Richard wasn't finished. He stood and walked over to Maya's table, his companion following with obvious reluctance. I'm sorry to interrupt, he said, though his tone suggested he was anything but sorry. I couldn't help but overhear your server promising custom modifications. As someone with extensive restaurant experience, I feel obligated to point out that kitchens have standardized processes for a reason. Requesting changes during a busy lunch service can compromise food quality and timing for other customers. The women at the table exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the sudden intrusion. Maya felt her professional composure beginning to crack under the pressure of Richard's public challenge. Sir, we regularly accommodate dietary restrictions and preferences. It's part of our commitment to customer service. Customer service, Richard repeated, the same way he'd said friendly service during his last visit. Or customer appeasement. There's a difference between professional hospitality and telling people what they want to hear, regardless of whether it's realistic. His companion, a woman Maya now recognized as Patricia Hoffman, a restaurant critic for LA Weekly, was taking notes on her phone with obvious interest. Maya realized with growing horror that this wasn't just harassment, it was a deliberate setup. Richard, Patricia said quietly, perhaps we should return to our table. Of course. Richard smiled at the businesswomen. Ladies, I apologize for the interruption. I hope you have a lovely meal. He paused, looking directly at Maya. And I hope your server's promises prove accurate. The third incident was the most damaging yet. It happened on a Thursday evening when Maya was working a double shift, having covered for Jenny, who'd called in with food poisoning. She was running on 4 hours of sleep and 3 cups of coffee, but the dinner service was going smoothly until she noticed a familiar figure being seated at table 15. Richard had brought a larger group this time. 6 people who looked like they belonged in a Fortune 500 boardroom, all sharp suits and expensive watches and the kind of confidence that came from never having to check a bank balance before making a purchase. Maya recognized the dynamic immediately. Richard was entertaining clients, which meant that he would be on his best behavior. Or so she thought. The evening started normally. Maya took drink orders, explained the wine list, brought appetizers with her usual efficiency. The group seemed pleasant, professional, discussing what sounded like a major real estate development project. Richard was charming and articulate, the perfect host. It was when Maya was serving the main courses that everything went wrong. She was placing the final plate, Richard's ribeye, cooked to a perfect medium rare, when her exhausted hands betrayed her. The plate slipped slightly, and while she caught it before it fell, a small amount of the red wine reduction sauce splashed onto the white tablecloth, creating a dark stain near Richard's place setting. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," Maya said immediately, reaching for her towel to clean up the spill. "Let me get that cleaned up right away." "No." Richard's voice was sharp, commanding. "Leave it." Maya paused, confused. "Sir, I can clean this up in just—" "I said, leave it." Richard's tone had gone cold, and Maya noticed that the conversation at the table had stopped entirely. All 6 people were now watching the interaction with growing discomfort. "This," Richard continued, gesturing to the stain, "is exactly what I've been talking about. The decline in professional standards, the casual attitude toward excellence." He looked at his guests, making sure he had their full attention. "When I was growing up, my father would have sent the entire meal back for something like this. Not because he was cruel, but because he understood that standards matter, that details matter." One of his guests, an older woman with kind eyes, cleared her throat. "Richard, it's just a small spill. These things happen." "Do they?" Richard's gaze never left Maya. "Or do they happen because we've lowered our expectations? Because we've decided that good enough is actually good enough?" Maya felt the familiar burn of humiliation, but this time it was amplified by the exhaustion and the public nature of the confrontation. Other diners were staring now, the restaurant's warm atmosphere chilling under the weight of Richard's performance. Sir, Maya said, her voice carefully controlled, I apologize for the accident. If you'd prefer, I can have the chef prepare a fresh plate, and we can move you to a clean table. A fresh plate. Richard's laugh was sharp. Do you think this is about the food? This is about competence, about taking pride in your work, about understanding that when you accept money for a service, you owe your customers excellence, not excuses. The silence in the dining room was deafening. Maya could feel the stares of every customer, every server, every person who had come to Corazón for a pleasant evening and instead found themselves witnessing a public humiliation. And then, from across the restaurant, a new voice cut through the tension. Alessandro Thornfield! The voice was warm, accented, familiar. Maya turned to see Alessandro rising from a corner table where he'd apparently been dining alone, his expression a mixture of shock and disgust. Alessandro, Richard's confident facade flickered for just a moment. I didn't realize you were here. Clearly. Alessandro walked over to Richard's table, his movements measured but purposeful. Gentlemen, ladies, I apologize for interrupting your dinner. Richard, might I have a word with you privately? We're in the middle of a business meal, Alessandro. Whatever you need to discuss can wait. No, Alessandro said firmly. It cannot. The tension in the room ratcheted higher. Maya stood frozen beside the table, still holding her towel, unsure whether to stay or go. Richard's guests looked increasingly uncomfortable, clearly wishing they were anywhere else. Excuse me, one of the men said, standing abruptly. I think I need some air. This evening has become unpleasant. Within minutes, Richard's entire party had made various excuses and departed, leaving him sitting alone at the stained table. Alessandro waited until the last guest had left before speaking again. What the hell is wrong with you? His voice was quiet but furious. That young woman is trying to do her job, and you're systematically destroying her professional reputation for what? Entertainment? Some sick power game? Richard's composure finally cracked. You don't understand the situation, Alessandro. This place, these people, they need to understand standards. They need to understand excellence. Whose standards? Yours? The standards that allow you to humiliate service workers in front of their customers? The standards that make you think your money gives you the right to treat people like dirt? Maya realized she was witnessing something significant, a crack in Richard's carefully constructed facade, a glimpse of whatever history existed between these two men. She should walk away, give them privacy, but she found herself rooted to the spot. I'm trying to educate them, Richard said, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction, to push them to be better than they are. By destroying their confidence? By making them afraid to provide the friendly service that makes this place special? Alessandro shook his head. You know what this is really about, Richard. This isn't about standards or excellence. This is about control, about making sure everyone around you knows their place. That's enough, Richard said, standing. You've made your point. Have I? Alessandro's voice followed Richard as he headed toward the exit. Because from where I'm standing, the only person failing to meet professional standards tonight was you. Richard left without another word, but his absence didn't immediately restore the restaurant's peaceful atmosphere. Other diners whispered among themselves, servers moved more cautiously, and Maya found herself shaking with a combination of adrenaline and humiliation that threatened to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure. Alessandro appeared beside her, his expression gentler now, but still concerned. Are you all right? Maya nodded automatically, then shook her head. I don't understand what just happened, why he keeps coming back, why is he targeting me specifically? Alessandro was quiet for a moment, studying her face. When he spoke again, his voice was careful, weighted with something Maya couldn't identify. Richard Thornfield is a complicated man,
with a very specific worldview. He sees hierarchy everywhere, and he's not comfortable when people don't stay in the boxes he's assigned them. But why me? What did I do to deserve this kind of attention? Alessandro's expression grew troubled. You challenged him. That first night, when you demonstrated your knowledge about wine, about restaurants, you showed him that his assumptions about you were wrong. Some people can admit when they're mistaken. Richard cannot. Maya felt a chill of understanding. So this is punishment for knowing more than he expected? In part. But I think it's more than that. I think you represent something that threatens his entire understanding of how the world should work. Before Maya could ask what he meant, Alessandro was called away by his own server. He left a generous tip and a business card with his personal number written on the back. Call me if he bothers you again. What he's doing isn't right, and it needs to stop. The fourth incident occurred exactly 1 week later, and this time, Richard wasn't even a customer. Maya was working the lunch shift when Patricia Hoffman, the restaurant critic she'd seen with Richard, arrived with a photographer and requested a table for a formal review. Maya should have been excited. LA Weekly reviews could make or break a restaurant, and Corazón had been hoping for mainstream food press coverage for months. Instead, Maya felt a sense of dread as she watched Patricia's critical eye assess every detail of the dining room. The review process started normally. Maya provided professional service, explained the menu with genuine enthusiasm, made thoughtful wine recommendations. Patricia asked detailed questions about ingredients, preparation methods, and the restaurant's philosophy, all standard for a serious food critic. But then the questions became more pointed, more personal. You seem very knowledgeable about wine. Where did you train? I'm working toward my sommelier certification through the Court of Master Sommelier. I've also staged at several restaurants in New York and Los Angeles. Impressive. And yet you're working as a server here. Why not pursue a position as a sommelier or wine director? The question felt loaded, dangerous. Maya chose her words carefully. I'm gaining experience in all aspects of restaurant operations. My goal is eventually to open my own establishment. Patricia's pen moved across her notepad. Ambitious. Tell me, do you think it's appropriate for servers to share their personal career aspirations with customers? Maya felt the trap closing around her, but she couldn't see a way out. I believe in being authentic with guests who show genuine interest in our program. I see.
Maya read the review on her phone during her break, sitting in the alley behind the restaurant with tears streaming down her face. 3 years of building relationships with regular customers, of studying every aspect of the industry, of working toward a dream that felt increasingly impossible, all of it reduced to a few cruel paragraphs that would follow her for years. But the worst was yet to come. The fifth incident happened on a quiet Tuesday afternoon when Maya was working alone in the dining room, handling the sparse lunch crowd while the other servers took their breaks. Richard walked in alone, dressed casually but still radiating that particular brand of entitled confidence that had become so familiar. He sat at table 12, the same corner booth where their first confrontation had occurred, and waited for Maya to approach. "Good afternoon," Maya said, her voice professionally neutral despite the anxiety clawing at her chest. "Can I get you something to drink?" "Actually," Richard said,
I'd like to speak with the manager. Maya felt her stomach drop. Is there a problem with your service? There will be if you don't get me the manager immediately. Maya walked to the kitchen with shaking hands, finding her father bent over inventory sheets in his small office. Papi, there's a customer who wants to speak with you. Carlos looked up, immediately reading the distress in his daughter's expression. What's wrong, mija? It's complicated. The man at table 12, he's been coming in for weeks, and every time he finds some way to criticize my service, now he wants to speak with you directly. Carlos's expression darkened. He set down his papers and straightened to his full height, which wasn't tall but somehow seemed formidable. Show me this customer. Maya led her father to the dining room, pointing toward Richard, who was now on his phone, speaking in low, urgent tones. When Carlos approached the table, Richard ended his call and looked up with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. You must be the manager. I'm Richard Thornfield, and I need to discuss a serious problem with one of your servers. Carlos pulled out the chair across from Richard and sat down, his movements deliberate and controlled. I'm Carlos Rodriguez, owner of this restaurant. My daughter tells me you have concerns about her service. Your daughter? Well, that explains a lot. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Carlos's expression never changed, but Maya could see the tension building in his shoulders, the way his hands rested flat on the table. Explain what, exactly? Why does she think she can provide commentary instead of service? Why she believes customers want to hear about her personal aspirations instead of receiving professional hospitality? Why has she never learned the difference between confidence and competence? Carlos was quiet for so long that Maya wondered if he was going to respond at all. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, conversational, and deadly. Mr. Thornfield, I've been in this business for 25 years. I've served everyone from construction workers to movie stars, from families celebrating birthdays to businessmen closing million-dollar deals. In all that time, I've never had a customer who required this much attention, this much management. Richard's expression flickered. I'm simply trying to help you understand. Understand what? That my daughter, who speaks 3 languages, has worked in some of the finest restaurants in the country and knows more about wine than most people twice her age, somehow isn't qualified to serve you a meal? Experience doesn't automatically translate to competence. Your daughter may have knowledge, but she lacks the judgment to know when to use it and when to simply do her job. Carlos stood slowly, and Maya could see years of controlled anger finally approaching the surface.
Mr. Thornfield, I think there's been a misunderstanding. You seem to believe that you're a customer, but customers come here to enjoy themselves, to share meals with people they care about, to be part of something positive. You've been coming here to cause problems, to humiliate my staff, to make other people uncomfortable. I'm trying to maintain standards. No, Carlos cut him off. You're trying to prove something, to show everyone in this room that you have power, that you can make a young woman who works hard and treats people with respect feel small and afraid. Carlos leaned forward slightly. But here's what I think you don't understand. This is my restaurant. These are my customers, my staff, my standards. And my standards don't include allowing anyone, regardless of how much money they spend, to abuse my daughter. Richard's face flushed red. You're making a mistake. I have influence in this city, connections that could what? Write bad reviews, spread rumors, try to damage my business because I won't let you treat my family like garbage? Carlos's smile was razor sharp. Mr. Thornfield, I built this place from nothing. I've survived economic downturns, health scares, global pandemics, and competition from chains with 10 times my marketing budget. You think I'm afraid of one man with anger management problems? The confrontation might have continued, but at that moment, the front door opened, and Alessandro walked in, followed by a woman Maya didn't recognize. Elegant, professional, with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. Alessandro took in the scene, Richard and Carlos facing off across the table, Maya standing nearby with obvious distress, and his expression grew grim. "Richard, what are you doing here?" "Alessandro, perfect timing. I was just explaining to Mr. Rodriguez here about professional standards, about the importance of—" "Stop." The command came not from Alessandro, but from the woman beside him. She stepped forward, and Maya could see Richard's face go pale with recognition. "Hello, Richard," the woman said, her voice carrying the authority of someone unaccustomed to being questioned. "I think it's time we had a conversation." The woman who had just entered Corazón moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had never needed to raise her voice to command a room. She was perhaps 60, with silver-streaked hair pulled back at an elegant chignon, and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of her surroundings with practiced efficiency. Richard's reaction to her presence was immediate and telling. The aggressive posture melted away, replaced with something that looked suspiciously like fear. "Elena," Richard said, and Maya caught the slight tremor in his voice. "I wasn't expecting you." "Clearly." Elena's gaze moved from Richard to Carlos to Maya, taking in the obvious tension in the room. "Alessandro called me. He was concerned about some behavior issues that needed to be addressed." Maya found herself studying the dynamic between the three people, trying to understand the relationships at play. Alessandro looked relieved but cautious. Richard appeared to be calculating his next move, the charm and aggression that had defined his recent visits replaced by defensive uncertainty. Elena turned to Carlos, extending her hand with genuine warmth. "Mr. Rodriguez, I'm Elena Thornfield. I apologize for the disruption to your restaurant." Thornfield. Maya felt the pieces of the puzzle shifting, rearranging themselves into a picture that was both clearer and more complicated than anything she could have imagined. Elena Thornfield, Richard's wife, mother, business partner? Carlos accepted the handshake, his demeanor shifting slightly in response to Elena's obvious sincerity. "Mrs. Thornfield, I appreciate you coming, though I'm not sure I understand what's happening here." "That makes two of us," Elena said, her attention returning to Richard. "I'm told that my son has been making multiple visits to your restaurant, causing problems for your staff and disrupting your customers' dining experiences." "Son." Maya felt the word hit her like a physical blow. Richard was Elena's son, which meant the elegant, professional woman standing in Corazón's dining room was connected to the man who had spent weeks systematically trying to destroy Maya's confidence and career. "Elena, you don't understand the situation," Richard began, but his mother cut him off with a look that could have frozen water. "Then explain it to me. Explain why Alessandro felt the need to call me at work to tell me that my 43-year-old son was harassing a young woman at a restaurant. Explain why you've apparently made multiple visits here for the sole purpose of criticizing the service staff." The dining room had gone completely silent. The few customers who had been enjoying their lunch were now openly staring, their meals forgotten in the face of what was clearly a family drama playing out in public. Maya wanted to disappear, to find somewhere she could process what was happening without an audience, but she found herself frozen in place. Alessandro stepped forward, his expression diplomatic but firm. "Perhaps we should take this conversation somewhere more private?"
"No," Elena said decisively. "If Richard's behavior has been public, then the resolution should be public as well." She looked at Maya directly for the first time. "You're the server my son has been targeting?" Maya nodded, not trusting her voice. Elena studied her for a long moment, and Maya had the uncomfortable sensation of being evaluated by someone who missed nothing. "Tell me what happened. All of it." Maya glanced at her father, who nodded encouragingly, then at Alessandro, who was watching her with obvious concern. Finally, she looked at Richard, whose face had gone pale and tight with anger. "It started about 3 weeks ago," Maya began, her voice steadier than she felt. "Your son came in for dinner with 2 other men. When I took their drink orders, he complained about the water quality, then made comments about my competence, about the restaurant trying to be something it wasn't. Elena's expression remained neutral, but Maya caught the slight tightening around her eyes. I tried to provide professional service, but he seemed determined to find fault with everything I did. When I demonstrated knowledge about wine, he became more aggressive, suggesting that I was overstepping my role, that there was usually a reason people like me weren't running restaurants instead of serving tables. People like you, Elena repeated, and there was steel in her voice. What did you understand him to mean by that? Maya hesitated. The question cut to the heart of what had made Richard's behavior so particularly painful, the sense that his contempt wasn't just about service standards, but about something more fundamental, more personal. I think he meant people without pedigree, people who work with their hands instead of inheriting their opportunities, people who have knowledge but not the right background to deserve respect for it. Elena turned to Richard, and she could see years of maternal disappointment in that single look. Is that accurate? Elena, you're taking this completely out of context. I was trying to maintain standards, to educate people about professional behavior. By humiliating a young woman in front of her customers? By making multiple visits to deliberately create confrontations? By using your position to make someone feel small and powerless? Elena's voice rose slightly, and Maya realized she was witnessing something rare. This woman losing control of her legendary composure. You don't understand the service industry, Richard said, desperation creeping into his voice. These people need structure. They need to understand boundaries. These people, Elena's voice was dangerously quiet. Richard, do you hear yourself? Do you understand what you are saying? Alessandro cleared his throat. Perhaps I should provide some additional context. Elena, Richard hasn't just been harassing Maya here at the restaurant. He arranged for a negative review to be written, coordinated with Patricia Hoffman to create a false narrative about the service standards here. Elena's face went white. You did what? I was trying to help them understand. You were trying to destroy this young woman's reputation for your own entertainment. Elena turned to Maya, her expression stricken. The review in LA Weekly? Maya nodded, feeling the familiar sting of those published words. It basically called me unprofessional, presumptuous, more interested in showing off than serving customers. And it was arranged by my son, as part of some twisted campaign to prove that you didn't deserve the position you held. Elena looked at Richard with something approaching disgust. Do you have any idea what you have done, the damage you have caused? For the first time since Maya had met him, Richard looked genuinely uncertain, almost small. The confident aggression that had defined their interactions was gone, replaced with something that might have been shame if he were capable of that emotion. I was maintaining standards. Whose standards? Elena shot back. The standards that say it's acceptable to use your privilege to hurt people? The standards that treat service workers like they're subhuman? The standards that assume anyone without an Ivy League degree and a trust fund is somehow less deserving of respect? Maya realized that Elena wasn't just angry about her son's behavior, she was mortified by it, ashamed in a way that suggested this wasn't the first time Richard had caused problems, but possibly the first time she'd seen the full extent of his capacity for cruelty. Mrs. Thornfield, Carlos said quietly, I appreciate you coming here, but I need to ask, what exactly is your relationship to this situation? Why did Alessandro call you about my restaurant? Elena was quiet for a moment, and Maya could see her weighing how much to reveal, how much context would be helpful versus harmful. Richard is my son, obviously, but more relevant to this situation, Alessandro and I are business partners. We own a restaurant group together, 15 establishments across Los Angeles and San Francisco, high-end places, exactly the kind of restaurants Richard has been claiming to represent. Maya felt the room tilt slightly. Elena wasn't just Richard's mother. She was one of the most successful restaurateurs in California, someone whose opinion could make or break careers in the industry. Which means, Elena continued, that Richard's behavior reflects not just on our family but on our business. When he claims to speak from experience about restaurant standards, he's trading on a reputation that he had no hand in building. Elena, Richard started, but his mother wasn't finished. More importantly, it means that his assessment of this restaurant, of this young woman's competence, carries absolutely no weight whatsoever. Richard has never worked a day in food service. He's never managed a restaurant, never dealt with difficult customers, never had to balance quality and efficiency during a busy service. His knowledge of the industry begins and ends with being a customer who expects to be catered to. The revelation hit Maya like a physical force. Richard had positioned himself as an expert, someone qualified to judge her performance and find it lacking. But he was nothing more than an entitled customer with family connections to the industry, someone who had confused proximity to expertise with actual knowledge. Alessandro stepped forward. Elena, there's something else you should know. Maya isn't just any server. She's been working towards sommelier certification, has staged at some of the best restaurants in the country, including Le Bernardin. Her knowledge of wine, of restaurant operations, is actually quite impressive. Is that so? Elena looked at Maya with renewed interest. Where did you stage in New York? Several establishments in New York and Lumiere here in Los Angeles, Maya replied, still processing the shift in the room's dynamic. Elena's eyebrows rose. Impressive. Those are serious establishments. What brought you to Corazón? Maya glanced at her father. This is my father's restaurant. I've been working here while finishing my business degree and sommelier certification. The plan is eventually to... She trailed off, suddenly self-conscious about sharing her ambitions with someone of Elena's stature. What eventually to what? To open my own place, something that honors traditional Mexican and Latin American cuisine while applying fine dining techniques and presentation. Elena was quiet for a long moment, studying Maya with obvious interest. When she spoke again, her tone had shifted from maternal anger to professional assessment. That's an ambitious goal. What's your timeline? Honestly, it was about 5 to 7 years, depending on how quickly I could save the capital needed. But after the review, she gestured helplessly toward Richard. I'm not sure if the timeline is realistic anymore. Because of one bad review. Because one person tried to undermine your confidence? Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks, but that way it sounded weak, defeatist. But the cumulative effect of Richard's campaign had been devastating to her sense of professional competence. It's not just the review. It's the public nature of the criticism, the questions about my judgment, my professionalism. In an industry that runs on reputation, that kind of damage can follow you for years. It can, but it doesn't have to. She turned to Richard, who had been standing in increasingly uncomfortable silence during the conversation. Do you understand what you've done? Do you comprehend the scope of the damage you've caused? Elena, you were trying to feel important by making someone else feel small. You were trying to prove your superiority by destroying someone else's dreams. You were trying to validate your existence by tearing down a young woman who has more knowledge, more passion, and more genuine understanding of this industry than you will ever possess. The words hit Richard like physical blows. Maya could see him deflaying, the carefully constructed image of authority crumbling under his mother's systematic demolition. What's more, Elena continued, you've embarrassed our family and potentially damaged our business relationships. Alessandro has been telling people in the industry about your behavior. Word is spreading that Elena Thornfield's son thinks it's acceptable to abuse service workers for entertainment.
That's not what I was doing. Then explain to me what you were doing. Explain why you made multiple visits to this restaurant. Explain why you coordinated with a food critic to write a damaging review. Explain why you felt the need to publicly humiliate a young woman who was doing her job professionally and competently. Richard opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. For the first time in their acquaintance, Maya saw him speechless, unable to construct a defense that would make his behavior seem reasonable or justified. He began, then stopped. I don't know. The admission hung in the air like smoke. Elena looked at her son with something approaching pity. You don't know. You spent weeks tormenting a young woman, damaging her reputation and possibly her career, and you don't know why. Alessandro cleared his throat again. Elena, perhaps we should discuss next steps. There's been real damage done here, and I think we need to consider how to address it constructively. Elena nodded, her attention returning to Maya. What would meaningful redress look like to you? How do we begin to repair the harm that's been done? Maya looked at her father, then at Richard, who was staring at the floor with obvious shame. The question felt surreal. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a server trying to provide good customer service, and now she was being asked to dictate terms to one of the most powerful women in Los Angeles hospitality. I don't know, she said honestly. The review will always be out there. People will always be able to find it, read it, judge my competence based on those words. Reviews can be balanced by other reviews, Elena said. Reputations can be rebuilt. But more importantly, the industry is smaller than you think. The right word from the right people can open doors that seemed permanently closed. Maya felt a flutter of hope, but also wariness. What are you suggesting? Elena was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking through possibilities. When she spoke again, her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that changed lives. I'm suggesting that my son's behavior has created an obligation, not just to apologize, but to actively work to repair the damage he's caused. She looked at Richard. Starting with a public acknowledgement of what actually happened here. You're going to contact Patricia Hoffman and tell her exactly what happened. You're going to explain that you coordinated a false review as part of a personal vendetta against a server who had done nothing wrong. You're going to insist that she print a retraction and an apology. Richard's face went pale. That would destroy my credibility. You should have thought of that before you decided to destroy someone else's. Elena's tone brooked no argument. Furthermore, you're going to personally apologize to every customer who witnessed your behavior, starting with the couple celebrating their engagement and the businesswomen whose lunch you disrupted. Maya watched Richard's carefully constructed world crumble in real time. The man who had seemed so powerful, so confident in his right to judge and condemn others, was being systematically stripped of his pretenses by his own mother. But Elena wasn't finished. Most importantly, she continued, you're going to do whatever is necessary to ensure that Maya's career prospects aren't damaged by your petty revenge campaign. That means recommendations, introductions, whatever it takes to open the doors that your behavior may have closed. Maya felt dizzy. The conversation had moved so far beyond her expectations that she was struggling to process what was happening. 20 minutes ago, she'd been a server trying to provide good customer service, and now she was being asked to dictate terms to one of the most powerful women in the Los Angeles hospitality. Mrs. Thornfield, she said carefully, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I don't want charity. I don't want opportunities that I haven't earned. Elena smiled for the first time since entering the restaurant. Miss Rodriguez, based on what I've learned about your background and qualifications, any opportunities that come your way will be thoroughly earned. My son's behavior doesn't diminish your competence. It simply requires us to work harder to ensure that competence is recognized. She turned to Alessandro. What do you think? Could we use someone with Maya's background in our sommelier program? Alessandro's expression brightened. Absolutely. We've been looking for someone with fine dining experience to help develop wine programs for our newer establishments.
someone who understands both the technical aspects and the customer service component.
Maya felt the world shift around her. An hour ago, she'd been a server with damaged prospects and diminished confidence. Now, she was being offered a genuine opportunity to advance her career based on merit, not charity. Maya took a deep breath, feeling the weight of possibility and responsibility settling on her shoulders. She looked at her father, whose eyes shone with pride and barely contained tears. "I would be honored to discuss the opportunity," Maya said to Elena, her voice steady despite the emotions churning inside her. "But I need to finish my commitment here first. My father needs reliable staff, and I won't leave Corazón short-handed." Elena nodded approvingly. Spoken like someone who understands true professionalism. "We can work around your schedule here until you're ready to transition." Richard, who had remained silent during the exchange, finally spoke. His voice was quiet, stripped of its earlier arrogance. "Maya, I owe you an apology. Not because my mother is making me, but because what I did was wrong. I let my own insecurities and prejudices hurt someone who didn't deserve it." Maya studied his face, seeing something that might have been genuine remorse. "Apology accepted," she said simply. "But the real test will be following through on making things right." As Elena, Alessandro, and a chastened Richard prepared to leave, Maya felt her father's hand on her shoulder. "Mija," Carlos said softly, "this is your moment. The door you've been working toward is opening." Maya twisted her father's ring one final time, then smiled. "No, papi. This is just the beginning." 6 months later, Maya would be developing wine programs for Elena's restaurant group while finishing her business plan. 2 years after that, she would open her own restaurant, a place that honored her heritage while showcasing her vision, built on the foundation of respect, excellence, and the unshakable belief that everyone deserves dignity. But that afternoon in Corazón, as she watched Richard leave with his tail between his legs and felt the weight of new possibilities before her, Maya Rodriguez knew that sometimes the most important victories aren't about proving others wrong. They're about proving yourself right. What an incredible journey we've been on with Maya. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you that perseverance pays off, please show your appreciation by liking this video, sharing it with someone who needs to hear Maya's message, and subscribing for more amazing stories of triumph over adversity. Your engagement helps me continue sharing these powerful tales, and I can't wait to bring you the next one.